And one of the big complaints at HP, of course, very technical business, is that bosses were always reorganizing, reassigning people, moving people here and there, with no real understanding of the social networks and the effect it would have on how the work actually gets done. And I've heard that complaint in countless organizations. The bosses don't see the fabric of relationships that really shapes how the work really gets done. So what they started doing at HP years ago, and it's a wonderful example of a practical, very practical systems thinking tool. They started teaching the engineers how to map their own social networks. To me, it was very analogous to what happened a couple decades ago when, well, actually it was in the 60s, when Toyota did the breakthrough, where they took all the statistical process control tools, which had traditionally been used by quality experts. And they said, no, you got to teach these to the frontline workers. And then you got to give the workers themselves the authority to continually improve their manufacturing processes and the expertise to study them and understand when a process is in control and all this statistical jargon. But the key is they took the tools, those statistical tools, out of the province of the narrow experts, the quality experts, and said, no, the frontline workers, they need to be responsible for their own continuous improvement. Well, they did something very similar with social network analysis. It's an awful term, and it's traditionally done by academics who come in and give out a bunch of surveys, and then they produce all these maps and show who talks to who about what, and da-da-da-da. So they said, no, we can't do that, because then nobody's ever going to people won't even tell the academics who they really talk to. They'll be very suspicious. But they started going to the engineers and said, hey, do you often find that managers don't understand how the work really gets done? They say, absolutely. Do you find that managers often try to reorganize, reassign people, do their management thing of moving boxes and arrows around, and screw up the networks that you really rely on to get your work done? Absolutely. Maybe you can fight back. That's literally what they told them. So they taught the engineers how to map their own networks. And it's real simple. They would get on a very technical problem, say, well, for this kind of problem, who do you need to talk to? Then you go to talk to that person. When you work on that problem, who do you talk to? Pretty soon, these networks would start to be identified. And then, when the managers wanted to move people around, they'd say, okay, great. Have you thought about our network of, the high-pressure nozzle experts? No, never thought about that. Well, here it is. So what are you going to do about that? So I'll tell you a funny little story that came out of this, and then I'm going to pause. So they were starting this work, and the engineers really got into it, because now, I say, they could fight back. The managers couldn't just reorganize all the time. And they found this really interesting network emerge. Again, it's just people saying, well, for this kind of problem, who do you talk to? And they do these little maps, but the engineers were doing them themselves. And eventually, this one network of about 30 people was identified. And it was became clear as some of the managers in the group were looking at it, wow, that's an incredible network. About a third of our new products have come out of this one group of 30 people. And they have, 6,000 engineers in Corvallis. That's an incredibly important network. And then somebody knows, hey, did you notice they're all women? Now, I don't know, but I would guess, in that facility, they probably got 25, 30% women. It's 90% engineers, but there's a good number of women. But that's pretty, statistically surprising. A network of, I think it was 27 people, all of whom were women. Yeah, that's weird. And then somebody said, oh my God, it's the Quilting Circle. No kidding. So I said, well, of course they're all women. That's the Quilting Circle. And so this group of women had started meeting about 4 or 5 years earlier. I guess they met once a week at lunch, and they quilted. Right? Now, I never quilted. But, I guess, when you quilt, you just obviously sit around and talk. You talk about your kids, you can talk about your family, but they're engineers, so they obviously talk about their engineering. So the managers were then confronted with this real paradoxical situation that arguably the most effective management intervention in the last 6 years in terms of new products was the damn Quilting Circle.